Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited for our panelists. We're excited for this discussion. It's an incredible topic, timely for Women's History Month, obviously, but I think more importantly, just relevant always in terms of the perspectives from trailblazing women in the boardroom. So we're going to let everyone come in and give them a few minutes. If you have a moment, we'd love to say hi to you in the chat. If you can say where you're based, where you are, wherever you are in your board journey. Are you looking for your first opportunity? Do you sit on nonprofit boards, advisory boards? Do you sit on private boards? Are you looking for a public board opportunity? We welcome a brief introduction in the chat if you want to take a minute to do that. Wonderful. Welcome, Eileen. Welcome, Azora, Aaron. Great, lots of nonprofits. Fantastic. Shellye, a call out for your book. Loved your book.
Oh, thank you.
If everyone doesn't know this, Shellye has an incredible book called Unapologetically Ambitious. Check it out. I'll speak to it in her intro in a bit. Wonderful, Vicky. Hi. All right. Well, I think we have a great group. So let's get this discussion started because I know we're short on time and no one wants to hear from me. Everyone should hear from these panelists. So with that said, hi, everyone. My name is Megan Wong. I'm the CEO of the Board List. I am incredibly excited for today's discussion. We brought together a phenomenal group of panelists, all experienced board members with varying paths to the boardroom and perspectives as sitting directors. Today's event is in celebration of Women's History Month, and more specifically, hearing from trailblazing women, whether they were the first woman or the first person of color on the board, and from how they positioned themselves to land their role, to the perspective and preparation required to be effective on day one, to navigating the dynamics of the boardroom from both the perspectives of an independent director and an investor, and other lessons they've learned along the way. I'm certain we'll hear many stories today that will inspire us all wherever we are in our journey. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Shellye Archambault. Shellye is an experienced CEO and board director with a track record of accomplishments building brands, high-performing teams, and organizations. She currently serves on the boards of Verizon, Roper Technologies, and Okta. She's also a strategic advisor to Forbes Ignite and the president of Arizona State University, and serves on the board of two national nonprofits, Catalyst and Braven. Shellye has over 30 years of experience in technology. She is the former CEO of MetricStream, a Silicon Valley-based governance, risk, and compliance software company. During her tenure, MetricStream grew from a fledgling startup into a global market leader. She is the author of Unapologetically Ambitious, Take Risks, Break Barriers, and Create Success on Your Own Terms, which I think is a perfect companion to this event and encourage you all to get it. This book will inspire you and provide the tools to enable you to fight the battles, make the trade-offs, and create the life you want. I also welcome Shannon Nash. Shannon currently serves as the Chief Financial Officer at Wing, a drone delivery company and subsidiary of Alphabet. She serves on the board and audit committee of NetScout Systems, a software solutions and cybersecurity company. She's also a board member and audit chair at Lazy Dog Restaurants, one of the fastest growing restaurant companies with 41 locations in 8 states. Additionally, she's on the board of SoFi Bank, and she formerly served as the lead independent director and chair of the NomGov committee and a member of the audit committee at User Testing until the company was acquired earlier this year. Shannon is passionate about board diversity and serves as a board advisor to Black women on boards, an executive board member to How Women Lead, and a mentor for Santa Clara University's Black Corporate Board Readiness Program. She is an attorney, CPA, and recognized as a qualified financial expert. I also welcome Aidan Madigan Curtis. Aidan is a partner at Eclipse Ventures, a venture capital firm with 4.3 billion assets under management and a team of investors with executive operating experience from world-class brands such as Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, Intel, Cisco, and Samsara, and a mandate to partner with entrepreneurs boldly transforming the essential industries that define and propel economies. A former executive and experienced operator herself, Aidan is passionate about working with founders and CEOs driven to push the boundaries of the digital physical frontier. Prior to Eclipse, Aidan scaled Samsara from 20 to almost 2,000 employees and ramped the very first Apple Watch from 0 to millions of units per week. While Aidan loves bringing new technologies to market, she is equally, if not more passionate about providing access to capital and leadership roles for underrepresented groups across a diverse spectrum of talent. She was a founding member of Samsara's DE&I committee and co-founded and led Samsara's Pride Employee Research Group to a 300 plus membership scale. Whew, what an incredible panel we have today. So without further ado, let me get the conversation started with our first question. And I pose this to everyone on the panel today, is what inspired you to seek out board service as part of your career? Shellye, can we start with you?
Sure. And I'll be candid. I had set my goals to be a CEO and I was working towards that, but I had really no idea about this whole boardroom thing. It wasn't until I was probably in my early 30s that I realized, oh, there's something called the board of directors. And board members actually hire and fire the CEO. I want that job too. So that's when I decided to put that on my target list in terms of overall career plan. And the first thing I did was look to see research, like who were these people and what do they do and what were their backgrounds, et cetera, so that I could try to shape my experiences to be able to compete well for those kinds of opportunities. But I was really naive about boards until, like I said, I finally realized how they worked, what they do, and the fact that it's a real job that people will pay you to do.
Shannon, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I knew really early on that I wanted to be on a board, but Shellye, I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that somebody I really admired, this woman, her name is Ann Fudge, she came to speak at my college, and she was like the first Black woman executive at a lot of things, including at, I believe it was Sara Lee, like the craft companies. And she gave the speech, and one of the things I took away from it, she said that the crowning achievement of her career was getting on a public company board. And I thought, she looks like me, and if that's something that's like super important to her, it should be super important to me. But I didn't even know what it meant. I just knew that like that had to be a goal. So I would like tell people, I started practicing law, I would tell people, yeah, I want to be on a board, just faking it, right? Because I didn't know what it meant. And then they give me more information. And then eventually I got like a partner that like let me, as an attorney, you know, a lot of times boards will bring you in to talk to the board about something. I started getting exposure that way and learning, but it was just lucky that I had somebody that looked like me, that inspired me. And then I had other people, we'll probably talk about supporters in my life, where I actually could ask them about it, and they would help give me opportunities to, you know, do things that gave me exposure to boards, and then gave me exposure to getting like the skill sets to be more of a qualified financial expert. So, you know, that's what it was for me.
Got it. Yeah, I have so many questions there ultimately about the exposure piece, the support that you've had, but we will get to that. So Aidan, what about yourself?
Yeah, I might be the only panelist today who wasn't actively looking for a board seat. Certainly at Samsara, on the executive team, I saw the power and the criticality of what the board was engaged in, and presented to our board numerous times. I ran all of our end-to-end operations for many years. So in a hardware-focused business, there's a lot of pretty important numbers that you need to come to the board and talk about, and you get kind of pushed on and scrutinized. But I wasn't actively seeking a board seat. Now that I know what it is like to be on a board and the relationship with the CEOs and the, you know, to the points of both of the other panelists, the criticality of what boards really do and the role that you play, I don't think I'm very excited to continue to be on boards and to grow that experience over time. But I came to my board seats through my role as an investor at Eclipse. And maybe just a bit of context, you know, Eclipse, like some investors, is a very sort of high concentration investors. So we lead rounds, and when we lead rounds, we'll write essentially the largest check. And part of that is a request for a board seat. We're very high conviction, we're very high engagement. So, oftentimes the founders who work with us want to work with us because they want that engagement. So we sort of happily take the board seat and lock in arms and go on a journey together. So that's the role. It was one I was excited to play. I've learned a lot in the past several years doing that. And now that I get it, I don't think I could ever go back.
So, and I'm just curious, and I know that your perspective is different here. Ultimately, how do you decide which partner is the one that's taking that seat? Is it through relationship development with the CEO? Is it area of expertise?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't presume to speak on behalf of all investors, actually. Different firms operate differently. Some operate where a certain partner will bring in a deal, and that person, regardless of necessarily why, would take the board seat if there is one as part of those terms. And not every investor takes a board seat when they make an investment. It depends really on the terms of the deal and the round. For us at Eclipse, we really want to make sure that our companies are set up for having the strongest board possible. So whichever partner, regardless of kind of who introduced the company, whichever partner is the best suited based on background, experience, capacity, and relationship with that team that exists on the C-suite, that's the person who will take the board seat. There are companies that were brought in by other partners that I sit on the board of, and there are companies that I've brought in and even created. Actually, at Eclipse, we also have a studio, and I run that part of what we do. So whole companies that I've created where I've asked other partners who have the most relevant experience to take the board seat.
That's great. Well, I think it's helpful context for our audience today too, and we'll get into this in a bit, but the dynamics between the investor seat versus an independent director is an interesting one too. And I'm really excited to hear Shellye and Shannon's perspective on the other side. But with that said, Shellye and Shannon, when you first recognized that a board opportunity was something you wanted to pursue, what were the first critical steps you took?
For me, it was research. Back to, I didn't really know what that meant, who these people were, how do you actually get on a board, what skills are required, I mean, all those things. So frankly, the first step was just research, talking to people and trying to understand how does this all work, what skills are required, and then figuring out, okay, how can I compete? Because that's the way I always look at things. What do I need? What experience, skills, backgrounds do I compete? Because everything you do, you're competing with others to be able to step forward. And so it was research first. Then once I'd done the research, it was then determining, okay, here are the skill sets that I bring, right? Here is kind of the profile that I believe can be competitive. And then I just started telling people. So telling people I'm interested in serving on a board and here's what I think I bring. And that was really my step, and then getting introduced to executive recruiters, right, et cetera. I'm sure that Shannon did similar things.
Very similar, and they're talking about this in the chat, but you guys go out and get Shellye's book. I mean, you talk about a lot of this in your book. It's so inspiring to read the stuff in your book, and then to hear you say it in real life is amazing. So I highly recommend the book, you guys. Very similar. I did research, and I actually did a lot of like board prep programs, probably more than I needed to be completely honest. Part of that was just maybe lacking the confidence in myself. So feeling like I had to be over prepared and take many classes. Even there was a couple of these board prep classes that I think I could have probably taught the class, some of the stuff that was being told to me. But that being said, I wouldn't change it, because what it did do for me is it got me into different networks that I wasn't in. And I got to meet more people in those classes, either doing the classes or people taking the classes. And so when I look back, like 7 years ago to today, a lot of those people are people in my network that I've either helped or they've helped me throughout this board journey. So I think for me, like Shellye, it was just being prepared, feeling confident. And for me, that was like making sure that I got the board certifications, if you will, which you don't have to do. I'm not saying people do. I'm just telling you that's what I did.
Right. And can I just add to that, Megan?
Yeah.
Because I completely agree with Shannon. People ask me all the time, do I need to take a board? And the answer is you don't need to, but if it will help you build your confidence, help you gain just a perspective of how things work and whatever, then definitely do it. But the biggest benefit you get is not so much the class as it is the network. So be judicious on where you choose to invest your time, and make sure that there is good networking opportunity. If before you take one, ask them how many people have gone through the program they're actually serving on boards. A lot of people will quote educate, but they're not actually helping with you breaking through in terms of that next level. And I'm just giving you my own little bias. Don't go spending tens of thousands of dollars for this either, right? Please.
I'd also love to jump in really quickly here, because it's a bit of a catch-22 to get on a public board. So maybe we'll spend some time at some point today talking about the challenges of that. But private boards exist pre-public as well, and can be a great pathway to get real board experience to lead up to, even better qualifications for a public board seat. So going out and getting a private board seat as an independent can be a great pathway to build your experience and that comfort at the board level that the other panelists have spoken about. And the one other piece of practical advice I would give, I've had some great success, so not related to my investor seat, in just saying yes to those conversations with executive recruiters, being honest about where you are, and even asking, I'm not in a position right now where I'd like to make a move, but I am open to board seats. And you'd be surprised how many executive recruiters would actually say, oh, interesting. So I'll veer away from this particular C-level thing I'm talking to you about right now, but I do have a couple of open independent or board seats that I'm doing some recruiting for. So that does happen. That's happened to me a few times.
That's great. We always talk about being heads up and always taking the call. To your point, even if it's not relevant to you, or you're not looking to make a move in your operating role, putting it out there across the network. Shellye said this, you all have said this. Just telling people what your aspirations are is the first step to this journey. I would even say, actually, and I do have a question, Shellye, you had mentioned a lot about, as you did research, figuring out what are the skill sets that you needed in order to compete. How did you frame that in kind of pitching yourself for the opportunity? Was it different than when you were talking about operating roles and opportunities in that world? When you think about your governance kind of value that you're adding to the board, how did you frame that?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. So before I answer it, let me just say it is really different. And when I say really different, meaning when a company is looking to hire an operating exec, they want to know, what you did. How did you do it? How did you think? The team you built? How did you recruit? Did people follow you, right? It's very much operations focused. And if you go into a board interview focusing on that detail, that thing, what they do, and trust me, I'm chair of two nom-gov committees, and I've chaired others in the past. What happens is the feedback from the board member after the interview is, wow, Megan was great. Maybe we should hire her, but I don't see her as a board member. All right. Yep. What they're looking for on the board is someone who is actually going to help, right, and support, but bring oversight, strategy. They want to know, how do you think, right? How do you engage? And will the experiences that you have be able to translate and be helpful to the discussion? Are you going to be nose in, hands out, meaning ask questions, contribute? But if you're someone they think is actually going to dig in, roll up your sleeves a whole bit, they don't want you at all. All right, that's not the job. So I just wanted to make that really clear. Operating board, very, very different. And then with regards to how to position myself. So yeah, when I first started on boards, which has now been almost 20 years ago, I did the research to say, okay, what are the top skills being looked at? And trust me, this is easy to find. Google search. Accounting firms put this stuff out there, search firms put it out there, consulting firms. I mean, it's not hard at all to find out what are the top skills companies are looking for. So I looked at, all right, what are the top skills being looked at? And then which ones do I have? Fine, let me make sure that I'm talking to people I can position that way. And I did. It was the time, tech. There was a lot going on in transformation and disruption, which I had done. International experience, because I've worked and lived in terms of internationally. So those were my top three, was tech, transformation, international. And here's the key, only have like three, because here's what we tend to do. People say, oh, what are your skills? And we list 50 things, right? Because we can do everything and we don't want you to think that we can't do something. But what happens when you do that is they remember exactly nothing. Nothing. And if they don't remember one or two specific things about you, then when someone says, hey, do you know somebody that has XYZ experience? They're not going to remember you. All right. So 2 or 3, that's it. So that they can tie that to you and they will remember more likely when they actually hear about something.
That is such a great point, Shellye. And I had to learn that the hard way. That's the one thing that the classes, which again, I did not spend $10,000 for, spent probably like $250 for like a board class and met some people and did a couple of those. Shout out to How Women Lead, because that's where I did the board training through. I came in with this board bio I found on the internet, and it had had 20 things on it. And I've looked at it recently. And so it always started with, I am an attorney and a CPA, and I just always talked about that. And somebody at that class said, nobody cares about that. You're not an operator. What are you going to do for us? And so I went back and looked at my latest tagline, and it says now, I am a visionary leader driving innovation and growth through financial operations excellence, go-to-market strategy, and technology. It doesn't anywhere in there say that I'm a lawyer, that I'm a CPA. That has nothing to do with what a board is looking for, because you're not an operator. When you start acting like it's your job, you probably will get kicked off that board, because they don't want you for that. Even on the private side, I see you agreeing, and on the private side, even more so when you're I joined a company that we took public, so it was private and then became public, and even like how I operated in the boardroom changed when we were private versus when we were public, and what was expected of me. I was like deeper a little on certain things on the private side because we were preparing to go public. And like I had deep expertise on some financial things that was helpful. But by the time we became public, the CFO no longer wanted to talk about that with me, nor the board or management. So I see everybody agreeing. I was like, jump in here. I think people need to understand ultimately you're not an operator if you go on a board.
Yeah, I'd love to add like vociferous head nodding over here. Sorry. But I think that Shellye's book, I can't wait to read it. I'm glad that it's kind of the #1 book that's being talked about right now in this call as being highly relevant. If I could throw in a #2, it would be a book whose title I think kind of says it all, by Marshall Goldsmith. What got you here won't get you there. And it's funny, I feel like I should actually finish reading the book. Don't know if I have, but I think the title is it. Like the I so strongly feel this was one of my hardest lessons too, moving from an operating role where you are really strongly judged by the metrics you achieve and your KPIs, and what you're actually able to physically do, the organizations you lead, and how you can make those organizations deliver. A board role, fundamentally you're aiming to enable an organization to do the same thing, but you really have one job. And I don't know, panelists may disagree with me on this one. Your job is to decide on an ongoing basis whether or not the CEO is the right person for the job. Beyond that, you have many other sub jobs. You need to do all your homework. You probably have some real roll up your sleeves moments on different problems the company is facing. I'm sure you get phone calls in different directions based on your own expertise. You're meant to be there for that C-suite team. There's audit committees. There's all sorts of other roles that you play. But your fundamental job, in my view, is to really have a view on whether or not the leadership is the right leadership to take the company forward. And that's your main active job. And you're constantly making that decision. And other than that, really it's their job to run the company, and your job to enable that as best you can. So I'll put that out there. It's a very different mentality than when you're in an operating role.
That's right. Anything to add, Shellye, Shannon?
And the only thing I'll add to what Aiden said, which is absolutely right. Number one job is hiring and firing the CEO. And then making sure that you have succession for the CEO so that you never get caught without a good CEO, right, in the role. And then from that, everything else flows. So if you have the right person, then the next question is, okay, do we have the right strategy that's going to deliver value to the shareholders? And if we have the right strategy, have we built the right team, right, and the right structure and the right culture to actually be able to deliver on the strategy? And if we've done that, great. Now, are we operating in the ways in which we need to from regulatory industry standards, right, et cetera, right? So everything starts with CEO, strategy, and then all the way down. And so the questions that you ask are really all around that, right? As a board member, your job is just to ask questions. That's what I tell people. Say, what's the job? It's to ask questions. It's to ask questions that will help management maybe think a little deeper, think a little broader, or uncover blind spots, right? Or issues that haven't been surfaced. And all of that can be helpful, right? And it's also to answer questions and offer advice and counsel when they ask for it. But that's how I see the role in very simple terms.
Yeah, I completely agree with like how you guys couched it. I wish I'd had that soundbite like 5 years ago when I was trying to figure this out. But it's quite the case. And then the mention about then there's like people who have expertise, et cetera. If you're somebody on this call who is going to be a qualified financial expert, because every board requires one, the other added thing that you and your committee will like spend so much time on is just risk and risk assessment. And
Mhm.
that comes in a lot of different like flavors, but ultimately that audit committee is really charged with financials, risk, and getting all of that kind of in-house and getting back and reporting that to the the formal board of these are the things that we need to focus on. These are the things that are fine, et cetera. And so you have a lot of times you will see audit committees meet more. Their comp is different than other committee comps. I don't know if we're going to get into comp, but that is the why, because that is the one committee that has to really, although the board overall is responsible for risk, the audit committee goes very deep.
Well, maybe that's a perfect segue into one of our questions around what it's like being in the boardroom. Let's talk about dynamics. So you might have the investor seat, you might be the independent director. When you're asking the questions, like Shellye is saying, what happens when you have to ask the hard questions? How are you navigating the boardroom? Are there examples where you feel like your voice wasn't heard as the one and only in a room, for example? There's a lot of layers to these questions, so I'm happy to start anywhere, but maybe first and foremost, the dynamics from an investor perspective, Aiden, and then as independent directors, how have you seen, potential challenges and debates and those types of conversations in the boardroom?
That's interesting to think of it as one perspective versus another, because I actually think the beauty of a board fundamentally is that you're all there with the same duty, a fiduciary duty to the company and a responsibility to ensure you're making that, what I said before, kind of that one right decision about who's leading, and then the cascading other areas that you get involved in, to Shellye and Shannon's point. I think I've experienced a lot of different dynamics, and not one board in my view is the same. I've seen independents who are often chosen by the CEO for different reasons based on their background and expertise, take very strong stances that disagree with leadership. I've seen investors play the same role. I'd be very curious to hear from the other panelists about whether there are common dynamics or patterns that they see playing out, because in my experience, when people are kind of thinking all, about the nature of that role that you play, you're sort of thinking the same way. It's not that you're thinking the same thing, though. There's sometimes very different perspectives, and that does certainly get interesting. But I've not felt different in an investor seat.
Okay. That's helpful. Shannon, what about you in your experience?
Yeah, so I definitely agree. It's not a one size fits all kind of comment. As I thought about how you asked it, I had different answers for different boards. There's different dynamics. I've also had different seats in different boards, and that also changes the dynamic. When I was the lead independent director of a public company, that was a different dynamic for me, and those conversations were very different because I was meeting with at one point, each of the independent directors on a regular basis. I was meeting with, key management folks on a regular basis. And so in terms of voice being heard, I think that it was just, yeah, my voice was heard, which is a little bit different than maybe another board I serve on where I'm not lead independent, I'm a committee member. Again, I want to be really clear. If you're a qualified financial expert, they put you on that board because they want you to go deep on like audit committee. And so having your voice heard on like a strategy or a product kind of discussion sometimes is a little harder because everybody's not really expecting you to have an opinion on that in that way. So that's just a different dynamic. What I will say, and I'm really interested to hear what Shellye has to say, because I want to understand from Shellye's standpoint, has she seen any differences between when she first started serving on boards and being a pioneer herself as a CEO of a tech company to what she sees happening now in terms of diversity and voices being heard on boards, if she sees any different. Because I'm newer at public company boards, and I will say that I haven't really encountered a board where I didn't think my voice was heard. That being said, I only joined a board where I thought the culture fit me, if that makes sense. I didn't join a board where I didn't think the culture would fit me, and that was one of the reasons why.
It's it's really interesting, Shannon. It warms my heart, frankly, to hear that you've never had that challenge. When I got on my first public board, which was just about 20 years ago. So at the time, I was the youngest on the board by like a decade. I was like 42 years old, I guess, something like that. And I was the only woman after like 2 meetings, because the other woman was on left. And then I was the only Black person. So in the beginning, I definitely had trouble being heard. And what I ended up doing, which is the same thing I would do in jobs, it's like, okay, this is not working for me. So I actually approached another board member who I worked on developing a relationship with, and basically said, listen, I feel like I'm not actually being heard, and I'd really appreciate your help. And all I'm asking is before the next board meeting, I'm going to call you before the meeting. I'm going to tell you, here are the areas that I either have concerns or I plan to make comments. And if you just agree with them, right, I'd love for you to just echo them when I make comments. And if you don't have to, right? It was no, hung on for a while, just a nice light act. Anyway, he did that for me. And literally after a couple of times of him doing that, I was then heard. All right. And it was fine. But that's something that, I experienced a ton coming through. And I do believe that has changed a great deal, because it's less of a club. I mean, honestly, 20 years ago and so, boards were more clubbish, frankly, than they were truly independent. So I think that dynamic has helped. And the fact, frankly, there's just more women, people of color, there's more differences around the table. That has helped. And I think folks focus a bit more on culture, at least the leading companies do. And that helps. So all of those things, I believe helped.
I think Shellye just hit upon something super important that people don't think about, that just because you're on the board, you don't stop having to really develop those relationships outside the boardroom. They're uber important to go get the coffee, go to the board meeting a little early and catch lunch with a couple directors, et cetera. You have to do a lot of work outside the boardroom to develop those relationships with your other board members in a way that, that wasn't something that I expected before getting on a board that I would have to spend a lot of time doing. But if you want to be an effective board member, I think that is a critical thing to do.
There's a very interesting, sorry, go ahead, Shellye.
No, I was just saying, fully agree.
There's a very interesting question that just came through the Q&A. It's a 2-part, and I'll split it. And the first one is relevant to this. It's when you're talking about culture fit, how do you know that a board you're interviewing with is the right one for you? What are you looking for? How do you feel that out?
So the questions I ask when I'm going through my diligence process, right, or interview process, it's really both, is a couple things. One, I look at how many meetings do they have? And I don't know, and I don't mean how many are scheduled, right? I mean, they'll say, oh, we have 5 board meetings a year. Fine. No. You look at proxy statements, because in proxy statements, they have to actually report how many meetings they actually had. All those informal, ad hoc, whatever. If they have a lot of extra meetings, like 5 full is what they say they have, and they end up having more like 15, right? Something funky is going on there. Right. So that's just a heads up. So that's something you should always do. Just check to see what's happening here, because it'll give you some insights and where to ask questions. The other is you want to talk to people about the dynamics in the boardroom. So help me understand how the dynamics work in the boardroom, right? Who typically leads? Do people, share? How is it questioning? Is it this? So you just want to understand how that dynamic happens, and then ask people about other board members, because the way they refer to them or describe them, whether they use inclusive language or that person or that, there's little signs. It's just like when you interview people for teams, right? Or to join a company, same thing. You're just looking for little signs to say, okay, people actually respect each other, or maybe not, right? They actually value people, or maybe not. So you're just looking, but it's all about the questions, because realize, yes, they're interviewing you, but you should be interviewing them just as hard. When you make a board commitment, you should think about it as making a 10-year commitment. Because boards, I mean, they bring you on board as far as they're concerned, and they're training you for the first few years. You're learning the business, you're getting, it's only after the 3 or 4 years that you're truly adding a lot of value. And so think about it as 10 years. So if you get on a board and you don't like it, it's not like you say, oh, you know, just like you quit a company, oh, I'll just quit the board. Because when you do that, everybody's going to say, why? And what they're going to assume is you couldn't cut it, that you weren't good. It's all going to be on you, because nobody leaves a good board just to leave, right? So just realize that's the case. And by the way, all those board members on your first board are the first calls for the second or third board that you get considered for. It is all about what those people around the table say about you. This is not like a company where you can kind of give the references you want them to call. No, it's all done back channel.
What about your experience, Shannon?
I was going to say that, but that back channel is what I use to look to see if it's a board that I want to be at. You know what I mean? So just like they're like Shellye's saying, just like they're interviewing me, I'm also calling around and saying, what do you know about John? What do you know about Jane? How are they to work with? Blah, blah. Like, that's the important part about getting in networks, so that you can actually do this backdoor on a lot of these people. And you know, I've shared before, one of the things that had me not join a board was I did a backdoor on a couple of folks on that board, and just got some real honest feedback about how probably it's not the right culture for me. And also I questioned their reason for why they were diversifying their board. It seemed to me like it was more the check the box type of exercise. So I decided not to do it, but it was literally because I had to do my own interviewing of them. And I think Shellye's spot on with that.
Yeah. I'll just add, I think, yeah, company rules apply, right? In the same way that you think about a very important leadership role that you're taking. It's a very important leadership role that you're taking, right? And I would also say that personal preference applies as well. You know, I think about some of the boards that I'm on. I was laughing a little bit to Shellye's point about, you know, how often the board is supposed to meet. Like, some companies, you know, even earlier stage companies, they'll really pull on their board a lot. It's you know, it's a different expectation, maybe at a different sort of size and scale and stage. If you have 15 board meetings a year and you're a public company, there's some going on. But like, you know, if you want to actually be the bat phone for a CEO, if you want to get engaged and be pretty hands-on on some of the really intriguing challenges that early stage or kind of mid-stage companies face, a board can be a great role in one of those sort of private side boards. And so I really also think it's, you know, it's the question of culture, the question of the nature of the company, what it does and how it engages with its board is a personal preference thing like anything else. So I think very much agreeing with the other panelists that you should be deliberate about that and make sure you're self-selecting into the culture and the dynamic that you want to be a part of. And there's lots of different versions.
Yeah, and you just triggered another thought. One of the things that I do each time is I always ask the CEO, how do you use your board? I just a very general question, how do you use your board? And that also gives you insights, because some boards, like some boards I'm on, you know, the CEO will reach out in between meetings, you know, for questions or for, hey, just want to run something past you, et cetera, or heads up or whatever. But back to the private board, one of the beautiful things about a private board is that your job is not operating. So you don't go in and say, oh, I'll do the whatever code review because I happen to have that kind of skill set, right? Or I'll do that. No, but if the company asks you to, right, then you can, then absolutely. So there's more opportunity in a private company to actually get engaged, to really help like that. You just let them know you're interested. Trust me, I ran a private company for a long time, totally used the board for all kinds of things. But it was me asking versus them requesting or requiring. That's the key. It's the dynamic. You make your willingness known and then allow them to pull you in.
That's great. It's relevant to this in the sense that once you land the room or land the role and you're in the room, what are the things that you do to prepare for effectiveness? What materials are you reading? Who are you speaking to? We've already spoken a bit about developing relationships outside the boardroom itself, but are you going to the CEO, the CFO, getting additional context about the company? How do you arm yourselves and how do you prepare so that on day one you're effective? Because essentially the frequency is so low in terms of how many times you're coming together, I imagine that there's a lot of preparation that goes into a board meeting.
Yeah, well, when you first join a board, a well-organized company has a thoughtful and comprehensive orientation program, which will allow you to indeed meet with all the senior executives. You'll review, key like business models, if that's what's, it all depends on what's important to that company. I mean, with Verizon, I actually climbed a tower, okay? So that there's all kinds of things that companies can do around that. Now, if the company doesn't, because like I said, not all do, well, some are not very organized. So if the company doesn't have that, if once you say, oh, I'm interested in joining, help me understand your onboarding process, and they go, oh, well, yeah, we can arrange for you to meet with the CFO, right? Then you say, that'll be wonderful. I'd also like to, and then what you want to do is to meet with the executives, basically that you'll be interacting with on the board, right? Chief legal counsel is key. So yes, the chief financial officer, whoever is the operating exec or two, right, is. So you definitely want to make sure you're meeting with those first people, the chief, the CHRO, right? So you want to make sure you're having those pre-meetings first. And then you can also ask, and they will provide like maybe 3 meetings worth of meeting materials. Because what that will do is allow you to read and get up to speed. So when you show up, it's not everything brand new and every acronym. Oh, by the way, every company has their own language. It's all English. Every company has their own language, acronyms, terms, this, that, and the other. So trust me, when you first get that board deck, you're going to look in like 5% of the words, you're going to think, I have no idea what they're talking about. So what I would do is I just always I didn't interrupt meetings because that just irritates everybody. As you're going through, just make notes. I literally just wrote it down, and during the break, I pull another board member and say, okay, so what's ADRT, right? What is it? What is it? So that I could catch up. But those things you're gonna have.
Makes sense.
Agree. I think I had put that in the chat. I'm like, that's one of the questions I asked before I even go on the board. Like, what's your onboarding process? How is this going to work for me? So you mentioned like there's the quarterly meetings, and so how do you stay in touch with the company, et cetera. But there's also committee meetings. And so I know I keep going back to audit because there's somebody out here who is a qualified financial expert who's going to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I bet you, afterwards. But we have a lot of meetings in between these board meetings, especially on my committees. And so it's not about, do I feel like I'm getting enough information? I'm getting a lot of information to try to get prepared. And so I have to do all kinds of other things on my own. And luckily there are lots of board member, finance, CFO resources out there from all the big fours. They all do all kinds of things to keep us abreast of what's going on from a qualified financial expert standpoint. So, as a board member, I think people don't understand that there's still a ton of continuing education you do for yourself, depending on what's going on with your board. Another hot thing that a lot of boards are talking about is cybersecurity, and doing cybersecurity tabletop exercises and things of that nature. And so again, it's not that you kind of get on the board and you stop learning and innovating. It's almost like the opposite. You do a lot of other innovating and learnings that you weren't doing in your operator role. And then I will make a plug for people who do this as an operator and working. You have to be very good at scheduling, like amazingly good at scheduling. And you just have to have the support of your job, because there will be a conflict where you will have to go tell your CEO, I can't do that thing because I have a board meeting for a public company. So you want to make sure that your CEO and your board, that they're on, like they agree to you doing this. And so for me, what's been valuable is picking boards that I think are additive to my day job, if you will, because then it's not seen as a competition. It's seen more of, let's ask Shannon. She knows a lot more about that industry because she serves on that board. And this is an industry we care about for our product or service.
Right. Yeah. And let me just give a shout out for audit committee. So one of the pieces of advice I got when I first started serving on boards was to join the audit committee. And I was like, what? The audit committee? I mean, that's the one, as Shannon said, there's extra work, there's more, all those things. But the feedback I got made a lot of sense. What my mentor said was, Shellye, if you join the audit committee, you will understand how the company actually makes money. And that's key. Revenue and profits do not equal. So how it looks like they make money versus how they really make money might be different. And if you understand how they actually make money, then your ability to be thoughtful and insightful around strategic decisions and trade-offs is just deeper because you actually understand how to make money. And anyway, so I've joined the audit committee of every company that I joined. The first committee, they say, what committees you're interested in? Audit. Now, I don't always stay on audit, but I'm actually serve on audit for a good, 3 years until I feel, all right, I've got it, and then go do something else. So I'm just telling you, you don't have to be a financial expert to serve on the committee. The committee just has to have at least one in terms of financial expert. But I encourage everyone you get on board, join the audit committee, make sure you understand the numbers, how it works. It will make you a better and more effective board member.
So Aiden, from your perspective, and I know you sit on a lot of private company boards, there's not necessarily the same structure of committees. How do you get the same level of depth experience? Is the onboarding process as buttoned up in these cases? Is it a little bit more casual, ad hoc? And from your perspective, like at what stage are private companies putting their first independent on their board and putting some kind of structure around governance?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, as an investor, if you're getting your board seat through the terms of your investment, presumably you've done some real diligence. I can't speak for every investor I know at Eclipse. That's definitely the way we operate. So I'm walking onto those boards with pretty nitty gritty in-depth knowledge of where the company is at. Sometimes the company is pretty early though, right? So what is there really to know other than where the company seems to be going, the quality of the people engaged at the leadership level, what early product feedback and early commercial feedback looks like. I'm also on some later stage boards as well, but there's, from an investor's perspective, hopefully you've done your homework, right? When you're entering that board seat. Now, I think from Series Seed and Series A and beyond, it depends a little bit on like how the boards, what the terms look like of the investments, how the board is structured. And as a CEO, you play a big part in deciding, what terms you want to take and what that means for you from a board composition perspective. So for those of you out there thinking of starting companies and stepping into that next journey in life, definitely do pay attention to what your investor terms are in terms of board composition, because ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the board has that one big job, which is deciding if you keep your job as a CEO and then how to support you along the way. So there are different times in a company's life that they may choose to bring on independence, and it depends a little bit on what they've negotiated for along the way. I think that, based on what I've seen, it's really healthy to have an independent board member even very early. And where we've used independence, presumably your investors know, a set of very useful things for you as a founder or a CEO. If you're choosing to take capital from a certain investor, it's because you believe they can be additive, not only from their capital, hopefully. So ideally, your investor board seat is also for someone who really knows a lot about your business, about the competition, about the market, and can help further you in a bunch of ways. But the role of the independent can be fantastic in terms of getting, industry leading experts who have the right Rolodex or the right strategic background and really further the company. And we look very actively for those people if the board is composed in such a way that we can bring one on and really work with the CEO to bring them on as soon as possible. So hopefully that's not too broad, but as specific as I can be, given every company is a little bit different.
Yeah, Aiden, I'm so glad you said you believe that earlier is better. I believe that most private companies wait too long to bring on an independent, that you should bring one on early. It's just helpful to have another voice in addition, right, to investors that are there. So great shout out.
Absolutely. And I think for the audience here too, we've spoken a lot about public companies, but there are opportunities throughout late to mid-stage early private companies who are bringing on their first independent. There is a question here in the chat as it relates to well, actually, first and foremost, for your first opportunity, how choosy do you actually get to be? So when we talk about culture fit, when you're just trying to get your first for-profit opportunity, how much do you weigh that, and how much you just try to get your first board seat? I know
yes, you want your first board seat and it's very exciting, but no, you don't hold your nose, close your eyes and jump in anyway. No, this is, there is a real fiduciary responsibility, number one. And number two, you're going to wear the I'll call it either the taint or the shine of that board for a very long time. So no, do not just jump in and take one like, oh, I don't like this culture, and no, I don't like their decision process, and no, I don't like how they go to market, and no, I don't like the focus, the lack of diversity, and no, I don't like this, and I don't like this, but yeah, I'm going to take it because it's my first one. No, because then people are going to say, why did you join that board? And you're going to have to make it up. Right? I mean, no, no. Do your diligence. If there's one board out there that wants you, there will be another one. It may not be in 30 days. It may not be in 60 days, but it's not worth compromising your personal integrity, right? And your personal reputation just to get on a board. Trust me, we can look around a lot of people that are kind of sorry they're on some of the boards they're on right now.
No, that's great advice. I mean, we often talk about this with our candidates at the board list. It's ultimately, it's worth the wait. And we have to set those expectations that sometimes this journey is a year or two, and it's kind of like sometimes kissing frogs in a way. You're just waiting to have those conversations, but ultimately, when you find the nexus of your interests, your passions, your skill sets, and the right culture fit, it works, and it's worth your time, right? We all have, that is the most limited resource we all have, is time. How much time do you want to spend on a board that you're not enjoying? It's not necessarily worth it. So in any case, great advice. So a couple other questions that we have. I'm going to transition into the Q&A because I know we only have about 8 minutes left. But actually, this is something that we were preparing to ask anyways, and it's relevant. What is something that surprised you about the process of getting your first board opportunity or a board opportunity, and something that surprised you about the dynamics in the boardroom? And I'll pose this to everyone. And Shellye, do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. So that surprised me when I first got onto the board was, and this is going to sound so silly, but it's like, oh, this is just like a business meeting. I mean, you go in thinking, oh, I'm entering the boardroom, right? And you open the door and you walk in, and all these people, and their titles and their background and experience. And as I told you, I was pretty young and the whole bit when I joined mine, and I just had this whole big view of what this was. And once the meeting got started, it's like, oh, okay. So that was one. I had envisioned it to be just much more intimidating than it actually was. So that was one. And then what was the second question? You said two-part.
What surprised you about the journey to the boardroom?
Oh, about the journey itself. Just people had said it's all about networking. It's all networking. It really is. It really is.
Yeah. Shannon, what about you? What surprised you?
I agree with that networking thing. I've gotten a board. I've actually gotten a board position through a recruiter, which a lot of people say it's hard to get one through a recruiter. But Shellye is still right. The recruiter found me through somebody in my network. Like, there's no way that person would have found me if somebody in my network didn't tell that recruiter to call me. So it's still the network that did the thing. But I will say that surprising in the journey was that it was long yet quick, if that makes any sense. Meaning, I felt like it was like so long, and I was networking and I was going to all these things and meeting all these people, and nothing was happening. And then like I somehow like got to the right network at the right time that user testing was looking for somebody on their board, and it was quick. Because then I expected, oh, this is going to be like really like a long thing, and it was just like everything fit so well on all the back channeling I did on me and they did on me, it all like fit, and it was just like a quick thing. So it was long yet quick at the same time, and that was a little surprising to me. And then kind of piggybacking off of what Shellye said, like kind of first board meetings, I should have thought about it. Like, again, I'm at an operator job, I'm C-suite. There's so much psychology and people relationships that goes to being on a board. And I don't know if I expected that it would be like that much work on the people side, but it's just like anything else. It is, you still got to have relationships and you have to work at them.
Yeah. I guess just to add from my perspective, I very much agree with Shannon and Shellye, but also to make kind of the opposite point, what surprised me was the weight of it. So I'm walking into a meeting and I have 3 hours every quarter, and I'm supposed to walk out of there feeling either like we're on the right track or we're on the wrong track, and have a perspective on what to do about it, and be able to, hopefully provide some very meaningful, either kind of thumbs up, like this is great, or more likely real feedback and constructive support in areas where I see warning flags, or, there's things to pay more attention to, or to think a little harder about. It's a very little moment in time in the grand scheme of what a company is doing, where you need to have some pretty succinct, well-synthesized views. And to me, I was like, how are you supposed to fit all this in like 3 hours? Doesn't make any sense. So I think maybe I just haven't cracked the nut yet, but very open to feedback from Shellye and Shannon on how you can take that one offline, how to be a board member at the right level. I end up on the phone very frequently with my CEOs. And I think, again, this might be private stage, it might be earlier stage companies in certain respects, where the color I get helps me do my job much better, so that when I finally get to the boardroom for those very special moments, I'm swimming in what the company is up to. So I don't feel like I have these big views to hold with like very little, a board packet and very little information. So that surprised me, and I figured I needed to just operate differently, because maybe it's the former operator or whatever. I needed more information to feel like I had judgment in those moments.
Yeah, almost by definition, private companies, when they prepare, they don't give you nearly enough information. I mean, my board decks, by the way, people, my board decks are like 300 pages.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so, but private company, no, you'll get a few decks for sure. It's not 300 pages. So you absolutely need to spend a bit more time in terms of understanding what's going on.
I did want to make a quick shout out before I miss the chance to, we're always looking to meet people who are interested in independent board seats as well, who would be qualified, great independent members for our companies. So do feel free to reach out. And thank you to the board list for the chance to say that, and, to some very, very qualified, wonderful people.
Well, I am really sad to have to bring this conversation to a close. There are many questions in the Q&A that we have not had a chance to get to. The comments have been so incredibly supportive. This has been one of the best conversations. This is so informative. Everyone is incredibly insightful. So thank you all so much for joining us today, spending this time and having this discussion. I want to leave it open just to say, is there anything that the three of you want to leave us with before I close?
Yeah, I guess the main thing I'll leave you with, because we talked about, most people here are trying to get on a board or get on another board, have the three things that you're known for. Let people know what that is. Not only let people who are already connected with boards, people who are somehow connected, either they're in the boardroom, they're a lawyer that are presenting the boardroom, they're a consultant, and there's all kinds of people in and around board meetings. Let all of them know, but don't just do that. Ask them who else they think you should talk to about your interest. That way you break into their network, because this is all about network, and your network's only so big. Each is only so big. So the key is to break into other people's networks. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful. Shannon,
Yeah,
anything to add?
I mean, she said it. It's network. Like it's just that simple. Like all the other things have to line up. You control that. But the network piece helps you get that luck and helps everything match to get you on a board. But if you're not doing the network piece, I mean, I know very few people who just happen to get on a board and they're not like network somehow. That's like not the way that this is done.
I would be thinking about private boards. It's a great way to get some real board experience. And huge thanks to Shannon and Shellye. I learned a lot listening to you both.
All of you guys, thanks. This was fun. Thanks so much for putting it together, Megan. And Shannon, great to see you. And Aiden, it was wonderful to meet you.
Thank you all so much. For everyone in the audience, it is free to create a profile on the board list as a candidate. As we talked about networking, our job at the board list is to help build that network for you. We work with VC, PE, search firms, and other talent partners who are opening up opportunities and access to opportunities in the boardroom. But the first step is to let us know that you're interested. So feel free to join us, create a profile. It is free. And with that said, we also have our own membership offerings that help focus on refining that value proposition that Shellye had spoken about, your positioning, the 3 things, what are you expert at? We can help you and work with you on doing that too. But as Shannon said, and as everyone said, it doesn't need to be a ton of time or a ton of money. Just get clear on what it is that you want, get clear on how you want to position yourself and the value in the boardroom, and then meet the right people and form the right connections, and it will happen. So thank you all so much. With all of that said, we'll leave a link in the chat to join us at the board list. And in the meantime, thank you to our panelists and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.